There's one of the key kind of psychologists that's done a lot of work on resilience is Karen Reevish, and I really like this quote. We're in uncharted waters at the moment, as we all know. Life seems to be changing day by day, and I thought this quote is really important when we think about what resilience is. You know, it is about that ability to bounce back, to dig deep when times are tough, to remain positive, and it's really hard to do that at the moment. So she gives this little quote which I love, and you can have a read of that. Hopefully you can all see that. That resilience is not all or nothing. It comes in amounts. You can be a little resilient, a lot resilient in some situations and not in others. But no matter how resilient you are today, you can be more resilient tomorrow. I think it's a really good way of looking at life at the moment, is that we need to think day to day. There's lots of stuff in your businesses where you are going to have to think ahead, and I do get that, but from a psychological perspective and a behavioural perspective, we kind of need to be really tuned in to how we are feeling in the here and now, and focusing on in the here and now and today, and how we're feeling, and maybe thinking about tomorrow a little bit. So that's really, really important. I'm going to go to the next slide, and when I've done the next slide, we're going to have some time for some questions. So what I want to show you is something called, and this is where I want to start off really, is understanding how our behaviours become affected by different situations. And this is the most basic kind of model that we use in behavioural psychology to help us understand our reactions in different situations. And I'm going to run through this model, and then we'll break out for a couple of minutes to see if anyone's got any questions about this. So you should be able to see my cursor. And how I want to explain this to you is that we're all faced with day-to-day situations. So the big situation, obviously, is out there is coronavirus and how it's impacting on us. But every day and in every moment of the day, we're faced with a variety of different situations, and they might be big ones and they might be really small ones. But in any situation that we face, whether it's challenging or otherwise, in every situation, we follow the same pattern of behaviour. So whatever the situation is, whether it's, you know, having a difficult conversation with your mum who's self-isolating, or looking after kids who are at home and under your feet, that's your situation, or, you know, dealing with what's going on at the business, or specifics with what's going on in the business, it's the same pattern of behaviour. That's described as situation. Every situation leads to a thought, and we'll want you to really think about, just self-reflect now whilst you sat there quietly, on when you're faced with a situation, and at the moment it's challenging situations, I want you to think about the thoughts you have in your head. And they might be, so if I think, for example, let's just think of a typical example that might have already happened for me today. So it might be around preparing a session like this, and I've never done one of these before, and I'm a bit nervous about it. So the situation is, I'm delivering a webinar to a group of people. I've never done this on Zoom before. The thoughts I have in my head might be, oh God, am I getting it right? Can they even hear me right now? Is this going to work? Is it going to have an impact? And the feelings, the thoughts then always lead to a set of feelings. And those feelings that I might feel could be anxiety, nervousness. But for me, personally, it could be excitement and motivation and enthusiasm. Those are the feelings I might be feeling. And that's the way I'm heading with this. Every feeling leads to a behaviour. So if you've got a negative thought from your situation, it will lead to a negative feeling. So that could be anxiety, sadness, whatever. And those feelings will then elicit, oh sorry, I've changed slides by accident. Those thoughts will then elicit a particular behaviour. And that behaviour, when you're feeling stressed, might be to be impatient to someone, to shout at someone, to cry, to withdraw and not speak, to overreact, to put others before yourself. And we choose our behaviour. In this situation, for me, my behaviour I'm choosing is to be excited and to show that through being a smiley or whatever, be myself. And those behaviours then reinforce the situation and how you see it. So when we're having a difficult situation that we're facing, as we are at the moment, we're going to go through this cycle. And the way I see this cycle is almost a cycle like this that leads into a downward spiral, so that when we're faced with a stressful situation, we can end up very easily going round and round, but on a downward spiral. And I guess what building resilience and looking at resilience is going to help you with is, how can I just stop myself being on this downward spiral with the way I feel and the thoughts in my head and the way I'm behaving? How can I stop it and move myself up and out? So that was the behavioural cycle that I wanted to share with you. So we're just doing the setup so that we understand a bit more about how things actually work. If we want to tackle stress more easily and recognise that we're feeling anxious, or feeling that we're not feeling that we're coping at the moment, what we need to start off with is being self-aware. And I just want you to read through this list and just see if there's anything on here that you're noticing is happening more than it usually does. I will read it out if any of you are struggling to see that. So self-awareness is about noticing how you're feeling and how you're behaving. And are you aware at the moment of how you're behaving and the impact you might be having on yourself and others? Do you know when you're having a dip day? What I mean by that is literally a dip day. So are you noticing some days you're like this and other days you're up here? And maybe you're feeling you're on a dip day every day just at the moment. But do you know when you're having one? Have you noticed that you seem less patient with other people, that you're struggling with moods, maybe with empathy? Have you noticed any of that? And I want some feedback on this when I come back. Are you picking up on other people's needs as effectively as you usually do? Because when we're stressed, we're not necessarily great at doing that. Some people do even more than that, and others do less. And that's the next point. Have you noticed that your reactions to situations have become exaggerated and magnified? And lastly, are you finding it harder to think clearly? Basically, this is Fisher's change curve. So here, the psychologists that looked into how do we process change. One of the first things that is really important to notice about this particular curve, this particular pattern, is it's exactly the same as the grieving process curve. It's the same process. So when we deal with change, we're dealing with loss. That's essentially what it is. And we'll have a sense of grief, a real sense of grief, for lots and lots of reasons. This will cross over into your working lives, but your personal lives as well. This feeling of loss and change, and we all deal with it in very different ways. So I'm going to go through very briefly how this actually works. So when something's announced, like the lockdown that happened a week ago or so, one of the things we might do at the start of this process is have a level of anxiety. How am I going to cope with this? And then we might see the positives. We might journey through. We might see the positives. We might think, okay, it's not so bad. I'll work from home. It's a great opportunity to spend time with the family, or it'll be done differently. By the way, there isn't a clear line how we pass through this process. I'm just going to explain how it can work, and then we'll talk about the anomalies. But this often happens. People are quite okay with the change, but then we often go on this slippery slope down. And what this slippery slope down means is that we then suddenly, and this is where your dip days are coming in. Your dip days are where you'll suddenly feel, you might feel angry, you might feel a sense of fear, you might feel threatened in lots of different ways. Threatened because of your business, threatened because you're having to tell people about work and jobs, threatened in lots of ways. And along with that comes guilt around the needs of your workforce, your clients, your family, your friends. All sorts of things come into play here. And this lowest bit is where the depression can lie. I'll call it low mood because, again, depression is a strong word, and what we might all be feeling is quite a lot of low mood at the moment. Along the way with this, often around this stage, for lots of people, there'll be some people that just want to bury their head in the sand and pretend it's all going to go away, and it isn't really happening. and that's where lots of people are at. And then sometimes people just decide that they're going to, they become disillusioned, and they just vote with the feet and they can't do anymore. We don't have a choice with that. We're all self-isolating. We all have to play by these rules at the moment. And some people are going to get really angry about it. After a period of time, there's a gradual acceptance to the situation that we're all facing, and there's a moving on. And that looks like a really happy picture. For some of you, this gradual acceptance and moving on might be that you've wrapped your head around the situation and you're adapting, and you are already moving on, and you're okay with that. You're dealing with what's happened because you've accepted the changes that are taking place. Lots of us are not going to transition through this very quickly. There isn't a period of time where you're supposed to transition, but one of the things I've learned when I've been looking into how resilience is developed in people is that the most resilient people are the people that can travel through this at reasonable speed. So some people might be able to do this within a week or so, and there's not sort of a ridiculous optimistic attitude about moving forward. It's just an acceptance that this is how it is. But then when we have our dip days, we slide back down again. And what we'll find most of us doing is yo-yoing up and down. It's very, very normal, feeling like we're going there and back. And lots of reasons for this. There are some people who are absolutely fine with change, and I call those people A to B people very, very quickly. An A to B person is someone that's, we're faced with a massive change. Brilliant, let's move on. And they go across and move on. If you are one of those people, be careful, because often those people lack empathy and understanding for other people's natural kind of process that they're going through. I'm going to just do a bit of the sciencey stuff and look at what is going on when we are feeling high levels of anxiety. And remember, it's not just thinking about us, it's thinking about people within your teams as well, that what they're going through. So I'm going to do a bit on how the brain works. And you might be familiar with this already, so I'm just going to go through it. And if you've got more questions about the detail, please ask. I can try and answer as best as I can. Okay, so when our brain senses fear, which is primarily through our 5 senses, so a part of our brain called the amygdala gets triggered, and the amygdala are 2 almond-shaped balls that sit sort of deep in the one of the older parts of the brain. When the amygdala gets triggered, this is basically our fight or flight response. I'm sure all of you will have heard of the fight or flight response, but when our amygdala is triggered, we can only respond fight, flight, or freeze. There is a 4th one, but it's not relevant for today as a reaction. We're going to focus on the fight, flight, or freeze. And you'll have recognised that within yourself at different points, at different stages, at odd times as well, that you'll have gone into one of these 3 fight, flight, or freeze responses. When the amygdala is triggered in the brain, basically it floods the brain and then the body with a load of chemicals. Put very simply, one of those chemicals is adrenaline. So we're all familiar with that, but there are lots of other chemicals that get flooded into the body. And when fight or flight happens, basically the most important thing to remember is that you can't remember anything. There's no logic. Everything goes out the window. We actually can't access the frontal cortex of our brains. We can't do any clear, rational thinking when flight or fight is triggered. We can only think flight, fight, or freeze. I want you to think about what that looks like for you. You can't choose your reaction. It chooses you. When it comes to fight, it doesn't literally mean we're going to fight someone, but we might argue with someone. So you might have found recently that you've become much more argumentative, maybe at the work front with people you wouldn't usually lose your temper with, maybe on the home front. Flight is hiding away more, running away from the issues. Your response is to just drop back and withdraw. The freeze response is that kind of rabbit in the headlights where you just can't do anything, and it's an immediate reaction, and we know it's happening because you'll get that rush of adrenaline around your body. Your heart will start thumping, and it's really our most vulnerable time for our behaviors because we're not going to think logically. It's all about that. It's the fear of lack of control, and the lack of control and the ability to deal with change is most at play. That's what we're most afraid of at the moment. So we're getting this fear response. How long does it last for? Well, if you think about when your fight or flight has been triggered through something emotional, it usually it can last 10 seconds, but it can last for minutes, and in some people it can last for hours. And what actually has to happen, there has to be a process in the body whereby we have to release something called our stress chemical, which is cortisol, has to be released into the body before our brain can get back to normal. And it's only when our brain starts to get back to normal that we can start to use the front of the brain to think clearly about what we want to do next and what our next strategy is. But basically, when we're in fight or flight, we can't do anything about it. So the key question here is, how can I manage this process more effectively? What can I do to minimize how long I'll spend in fight or flight? Because it's actually very hard to stop it in reality. Okay, so feeling pants. Anyone been feeling pretty rubbish recently? And what I mean by that is physically as well as mentally. So it's really important at this time that you are looking after yourselves. It's actually of primary importance. And the reason for this is because of the physical reaction to stress. And you are all under stress. And I appreciate some of you might be thriving due to the stress, but lots of you won't be, and that's why you're here, participating in this today. But why might you be feeling really pants? So very briefly, cortisol is our stress hormone. We release it in the body when we are in fight or flight. So the way that our amygdala is going to calm down is when cortisol is released into the body, and that sounds like a really good thing, but those of you who know a bit about cortisol will know that it's not really a good thing at all. When we release cortisol into the body, it's actually not very good for us, and it starts to actually destroy your immune system. And right now, that's not what any of us need. It attacks your T cells that are in our white blood cell. It actually stops the production of white blood cells, the production of cortisol. So it's not good for us. It causes inflammation. So one of the reasons why people get headaches or tummy aches and lots of other things is because of inflammation of the arteries, inflammation of the gut, and that's cortisol that's contributing to that process. So we need to, more than ever at the moment, because of coronavirus, is to look after ourselves. If we don't look after ourselves, then we can't look after other people. And so what we're going to do throughout the rest of the actual talk is look at how do we look after ourselves so that we can help other people. And that's going to be really, really important. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And look at and ask a really important question. It's all about resilience, this chat, and I want to know what you're doing to look after yourself. I've listed down there your firm foundations for resilience. If you want to be a resilient person, it doesn't come with good planning, skills and strategic thinking. It comes from some very, very basic things, and these are them: eating well, sleeping well, exercising, socializing, as in, your Zoom, your WhatsApp, your house party, talking on the phone. So socializing, but talking to others is of primary importance at the moment. When I say talking, I also mean venting. So venting to others is also a really good way of building resilience. When we're venting, I have no problem with venting. I think it's a really, really good way of getting rid of how you think and feel. Just be careful who you're venting to, and is it an appropriate time. Make sure you're doing relaxation and self-care, and creativity and learning is also imperative. So these are like your foundation layer to develop resilience. These are the very basics, and if you don't use these, you can't use more intricate strategies that we might develop further along. We need to do the very basics. The other thing that's really, really important for you to do is to focus on playing to your strengths. Really, it's really easy when we're feeling vulnerable and we're feeling not as resilient as normal, is to focus on our negatives We really need to know what our strengths are and play to those. And we're not going to answer these now, but I want you, and we're happy to send you the PowerPoint after today, but really want you to think about what are the areas of strengths that you can play to? What are you really, really good at? How are you focusing on these every day? How are you helping others to focus on their strengths? And very importantly, what can you have gratitude for? Again, when we're feeling kind of sucked down and drained by that kind of negative spiral down, it's very hard to kind of look around you and find the positives. And I would say that it would be really, really important to focus on what you have gratitude for. To get perspective. And a simple tool for this is called the, you might have come across it already, the WWW, the what went well. And the what went well is finding 3 things every day that have gone well. It doesn't have to be big things. In fact, it's better if it's small things. So it might be having a lovely cup of tea. It might be that the sun shone. It might be that you saw the, what's not the satellite, the space station that's been going over at the moment. We've had a few clear nights to see that. That was one of mine the other day. Seeing a daffodil, seeing someone smile, helping a customer, it could be anything, but really focus on what you have gratitude for. So really play towards your strengths would be really, really helpful. I'm going to go to the next slide. And this is really important now, is when we're in stressed and anxious, our brains aren't thinking clearly, as I've already said. I'm going to ask you shortly, when I come back to the group, how many people are doing any kind of meditation and mindfulness. Now, a lot of people are going to go, no, that's just not my thing, because that sounds very hippy-dippy and a load of rubbish. But it's not. It's scientifically proven. That we know that when people go into a state of meditation, we actually go into something called theta brainwave activity. Our brain loves being in this state. It helps us get into flow, and flow is where we're in our optimum, where we can perform at our best. And theta brainwave is kind of gateway to getting through to our flow state. So very briefly, theta brainwave activity is when we are in those moments where we're so deeply relaxed, but we're not asleep. So if you think about when you're about to drop off to sleep, you hit something, I call it the sweet spot. It's the bit where you're not asleep, but you're not awake, and you're somewhere in between, and it's a real cozy feeling. That's when you're in theta brainwave activity. But you're also in theta brainwave activity when you're doing a jigsaw, when you're fully involved in the task at hand and the time flows by and you're not really noticing your environment. It means you're in theta brainwave activity. So lots of the self-care stuff will take you to theta brainwave activity, and that is crucial for your brain. Your brain really likes this state of mind. So that's a really good place to, and a really good scientific reason to think about practicing mindfulness or meditation. Can be really, really helpful. So this is I've put very little information on here because this is one where I really want you to contribute and really think about how you can use your communication skills. So if we want to build resilience, we've talked about the firm foundations and the very basics of things you can do to look after yourself. But I want you to now think about, okay, so how can I build on that? What more complex skills can I use to manage my ability to be resilient and my behaviours, my responses to those situations? 3 areas, that's all we're focusing on. Your communication skills. The 3 areas of your communication skills are, in very short, your body language, the words you use and your tone of voice. If we pay attention to all 3 of those areas, you're going to find that you are better able to deal with your ability to be resilient and your behaviours. I'll very briefly go through all 3, and then I do want us to, discuss it a bit further, and please ask any questions. So body language, for example, there's some really obvious stuff here. So if you want to embrace pessimism and negativity and stress and anxiety, make sure you sit with your arms folded. I'm going to demonstrate, and your legs crossed, and you're all hunched up, or you're doing this kind of thing, or you're bent over at your desk holding yourself down. That's going to create and exaggerate anxiety and stress. I'm not going into the science of the body language. You probably know a bit about it yourself. There's also very logical reasons for it. When we hunch down and scrunch ourselves in, or we don't sit straight, for example, we've got bad posture, we are cramping our lungs, our heart, our diaphragm, we can't breathe effectively. So if we want to feel that we can be a bit more in control of how we see the situation, we need to sit up straight, we need to have our shoulders back, we need to try to smile, we need to stand tall and strong. So we need to think about our body language, because it will really have a big impact on how you feel. Then there's the words you use. So when it comes to dealing with stress and anxiety, the words you use are massive. If you're going to say, oh, I'm really stressed, I'm really anxious, I feel terrible, everything's awful, you're just reinforcing that negative cycle. You really need to think about your use of language. We can say, you know, it is stressful and it is anxious and it is anxious times. We can also say, you know, this is a real challenge for me at the moment. We can use different words and language to express that. It's a challenge, or I'm going to work hard at trying something differently. And if we say that with our body stood, you know, posture is great and we're stood tall and straight, we're going to feel more confident in ourselves. I've written the words internal and external. We all have an internal dialogue, and those are the words when we're having a word with ourselves in our heads. We can often exaggerate the anxiety at these times, and we can have the external, which are the words we actually say out loud, but we need to think about those. And then your tone of voice. What's your tone of voice like? Is it saying, God, this is awful, there's no way around this, it's the end of the world, you know, it's a terrible situation? What's your tone of voice? Or are you thinking about your body language, the words you use, and your tone of voice all in one go by, you know, yeah, it's a challenge, but there's created an opportunity here. What's the opportunity? How can I help other people? One of the things I've done personally is that, you know, I've accepted, as being a self-employed person, that all my work's cancelled, and oh great, Boris is paying for me now for a few months, so that's fine. So brilliant, complete opportunity here for me to do things that I ordinarily wouldn't have the opportunity to do. So I'm changing the way I see it. And I want you to think about how your communication skills can help you. So the next few slides are about our attitude. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. And what that means is self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy is, put very simply, if you believe you can't do something, you probably won't. And if you believe you can do something, you probably will, with constraints. And obviously the environment we're in at the moment, we can't control that, but what we can control is our reaction and our attitude to it. So we're going to look at growth mindset and fixed mindset, and some of you might already have done some work on this with Gary before, but this is really looking at your optimistic traits versus your pessimistic traits, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Very, very quickly, so the psychologist Carol Dweck has done a lot of research around growth mindset, and she says that this is when someone has a good growth mindset, they see failure as an opportunity to grow. They can learn anything they want, not afraid of failure, happy to take feedback, like to try new things. Someone that's very fixed mindset believes that they are either good at something or they're not, that they can't learn new things, they're frustrated, they give up easily, they stick to what they know, they stay in the comfort zones, they take feedback very personally, might look at situations by, you know, the worst thing, the worst possible outcome. And I want you to think about yourselves in those terms. You know, are you more fixed mindset or growth mindset? And have a think about which one you're most likely to be. We've got a questionnaire. Gary's got a little questionnaire. We're not doing it now, but he has got one with you can test your own growth mindset. What we know about resilience is resilient people hang out here, basically. The more growth mindset you are, the more resilient you're going to be, and in a better position to bounce back and be there for people and cope well with stress and deal well with this challenging time. So we're looking at developing that kind of growth mindset mentality, so that we're focusing on the positives. It's not about being unrealistically optimistic, it's about being truthful and honest. However, our attitude is seeing opportunities, seeing how things might change for the positive in the situation that we're in. Moving on to emotional intelligence. So we've looked at growth mindset. I want to bring it in with emotional intelligence before we actually finish off. Emotional intelligence is a big theory. Again, I'm sure lots of you have looked at it before. The main theorist here is a guy called Daniel Goleman. You might be interested in his books on emotionally intelligent leadership, which is quite interesting. But being emotionally intelligent is also going to boost your ability to be resilient. And being emotionally intelligent basically is about you feeding into these 4 areas. Very, very simply, emotionally intelligent people are really self-aware. They understand how they think, how they feel, and how they behave. Emotionally intelligent people have got great social skills. They're thinking about how to communicate with other people, and their relationships with other people, thinking about the way in which they come across, the behaviors that they have. People with high levels of emotional intelligence have great levels of empathy. They really understand what other people are going through, and they can put themselves in their shoes, and therefore think about how they need to come across to other people. And then lastly, emotionally intelligent people are pretty good at managing their emotions, dealing with their emotions, knowing what to do with them. So allowing themselves to feel angry or frustrated, but having an outlet. So I know that for me, if I'm feeling quite angry, obviously I'm not going to kick anyone or have a fight. I might, maybe at home. But we think about sharing that. So we might vent, I might vent, or I might exercise to get rid of that excess energy that I've got. So emotionally intelligent people are going to have the right attitude that will help develop growth mindset to deal with these situations. And these, when we think about building resilience, I talked about the foundation layer. We're now looking at building higher up. So things that are a bit more intricate to develop resilience. Is growth mindset, having a growth mindset approach and having an emotional intelligent approach. They're really easy models to think about and to use because it's just 4 areas. It's a big thing to do it, but if you want to look into that, I think you'll find that that's really, really helpful. And then I'm just going to go through and show you the last few slides, which are my top tips, and then we'll come back and take any questions. I'm aware that people might need to leave at 1:30. So I'm going to go through strategies that I've prepared, but I want you to think about, have you got any in addition or any questions to ask me? So, oh yeah, so this was one last slide, the good, the stress, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Remember, and this is something really, really important, there are 2 reactions to stress. We can either have a bad reaction to stress or a good reaction to stress. And we can choose that reaction, we can influence both. And basically, the way in which we react to stress is based on 2 things. Your chemical balance and your attitude, and one influences the other. So the amount of, for example, adrenaline you produce in your body versus your attitude. If you get them right and produce the right level of adrenaline combined with a growth mindset, you will find at the moment that you are feeling positive stress and thriving on it. And I know, Gary, I'll come to you soon because I know you've got some stuff to share on how you're seeing this whole situation. But you can choose how you deal with stress. It's about putting those strategies into play. So those strategies that I've come up with are, I've just got 2 pages of these. So build on your firm foundations, which I highlighted at the very beginning, things that you should do to look after yourself. Being more self-aware and emotionally intelligent. Understand the impact of change for you and for other people. Notice when you're in fight or flight. Breathe, walk away, count to 10. Invest time in calming down the brain and the body. Focus on your communication and your communication skills and how you do that. Talk or vent to others much more often than you would normally do, and ensure that you do the same for others. So you're going to need to talk to people much more than you ordinarily do. Can't stress that enough. Play to your strengths, be growth mindset, help others, listen, care, and empathize. Use humor to, when appropriate, to reframe how you see situations. That's why we're all loving these daft videos that are going around. They're really helpful. Have gratitude every day. So think of 3 things that went well today. Be kind to yourself. Do not expect perfection. You're not going to get it at the moment. Do expect the need for flexibility. And I've just set some really short-term goals, medium-term goals and long-term goals. And what I mean by that is short, and this is what I've been discussing with some of my clients, is a short-term goal today or this week is the short-term goal, the medium-term goal is the next 2 weeks, and the longer-term goal might cover a couple of months, but really thinking small, because at the moment we cannot predict the future.